Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Before we dive in, I just wanted to remind you that today is July 31st. This is your last opportunity to book a call for the Inspired Love program and save $1,000. Now, what I'm going to do for those of you listening to this episode is I'm going to extend that opportunity through Sunday, August 4th, just to give an opportunity for those who are just now listening to this episode so you can take advantage of that. But we're not going to extend it beyond August 4th. So if you're hearing this right now, this is your chance. You can book your call at the link in the description right below wherever you're listening to this podcast, and I cannot wait to meet you on your discovery call. Lots of love, and thanks for tuning into the show today. Hey everybody, welcome to the Conscious Love Show. Whether you are single, you are in a relationship, or you're healing a broken heart, this show is here to inspire you, to remind you how beautiful, lovable, and amazing you truly are, and to give you the practical tools and insights to navigate from wherever you are right now to the loving relationship that you so deeply want to have. My name is Shane Kohler. I'm a certified transformational coach and trainer with over a decade experience helping people release their trauma and open their hearts to love. I've delivered seminars all over the world, coached thousands of people through my online platforms and programs, and every week I'm coming straight to you with the hottest insights and the best teachers around, bringing you powerful resources and profound conversations to heal your relationship with love, dating, and yourself. I'm so grateful you're here, and if it's your first time, welcome. You can count on me to always show up for you with my very best and a commitment to learn and grow myself so I can serve you to my maximum ability. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. I've got some awesome things planned for you today. So without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Conscious Love Show. Shane Kohler here. Pleasure to be on with you today. As always, looking forward to diving into another episode with you. Today, we're talking about the suppression of feminine power and awakening the divine feminine. And I think this is such a profound conversation. And I was just on here chatting with Instagram, as I usually do before I get started. And I was saying that, I think this is such a profound conversation, not only for women, but for men. And, I've worked with a lot of women in my program. I've coached a lot of women. I've also coached quite a few men. But, it's something that I focus a lot on with women is, awakening their feminine power, right? Expressing that, using that, utilizing it in relationships, being able to, what was I going to say? Being able to access that and create relationships through that, right? Especially for women, there's a very different way that there's a very different way that relationships show up when a woman is connected to her power, when she's accessing it and when she doesn't. And for a lot of the women who are maybe attracting men that, aren't committal or are not offering what you want, or maybe toxic in some way, or are using you or mistreating you, or for any and all of the above, using your power, accessing your power, bringing that to a relationship is something that's going to draw the right men in and repel the wrong men out, right? I always think of it as like a beacon, right? Where it invites in what's in alignment with that, and it repels out what is not in alignment with that. And so this conversation is so powerful. I think, for women, the applications are pretty obvious, but I'll talk about that today. I think for men, the applications are less obvious, but equally important. And, if we look at historically or contextually speaking, men have often suppressed or resisted or put down feminine power because they're threatened by it. And I'm going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk about how men are not all men. I think many men welcome it, and conscious men welcome it. And it's refreshing for a conscious man to meet a woman who is embodied in her power, right? That's something that for conscious men, it's like, oh my God, thank God I met you, right? But for a lot of men, and there's a certain culture of this in the world where there's a resistance to feminine power. There's a resistance to the discomfort that comes with that. There's a resistance to the vulnerability that comes with that. And men being able to accept feminine power, to honor it, to receive it, to uphold it, to protect it, that is something that actually brings out the greatness in a man. Whereas when men are resistant to feminine power, what's happening for them is they're operating from fear, right? They're operating from insecurity. They're operating from a wounded masculinity. And therefore, when a woman, or it doesn't even have to be a woman, but when somebody expresses feminine power, that makes some men very uncomfortable because their wounded masculinity is threatened by that. And so there's a collective healing here for women and men, where women learning to own and utilize this power. Hold on one second. Computer's about to die. All right, there we go. For women being able to own and utilize this power, and for men being able to receive and honor and protect and uphold this power. And there's a mutual healing that happens in that, where, you know, the woman is bringing out the best in her, the most authentic, the most powerful version of herself. And the man is bringing out the most in himself too, and releasing his fear, releasing his insecurity, releasing his woundedness, right? That would have him be threatened by that. And so it's a big conversation, and there's so much to talk about here. I was thinking this morning, I'm like, how am I going to cover all of this in one episode? But I'm just going to do my best to succinctly and clearly outline this conversation for everyone, and invite all of us, women and men, to really embrace this power. And that takes a lot of courage, right? When there's been a cultural suppression of this that goes back eons. And a lot of times when it is expressed, it's met with resistance, it's met with criticism, it's met with shaming and blaming and all different types of things. And it takes a lot of power to embrace and receive that in the face of so much resistance. And so I want to, I'm going to do my best today to outline this in a clear way. First thing I want to say on this topic is that women have just an incredible amount of power, and specifically an incredible amount of power over men. And the reason that men, or the masculine, the wounded masculine, is so resistant to authentic feminine power is because, whether consciously or unconsciously, they sense that power over them. They sense that that is, to some degree, or could become in certain instances, a threat to them. And that's where the resistance comes from. And that's why, you know, throughout history, men, through pure brute force, have disempowered women, right? It's been a way of maintaining domination, maintaining control. Even in certain circles, and I see this a lot with certain Instagram coaches and people who call themselves polarity coaches, there's a certain theme and a certain trend that says men should be a certain way. They should be a strong, masculine, macho, kind of tough, you know, person. And women should be these soft, delicate, I don't know what the word is, you know, these soft, delicate, easygoing, malleable, peaceful, type people. And a lot of people that you would think are conscious, and a lot of people that you would think, they're coaching people and they're teaching something. They're perpetuating this very old stereotype of traditional masculine and feminine roles. And I'm not saying that those roles are always bad. Like it's not bad for a man to be in a traditionally masculine role. It's not bad for a woman to be in a traditionally feminine role. In some relationships, that works very well. In some relationships, both people are able to surrender into those roles, and it feels very natural and it feels very comfortable for them. But to put yourself, or to put someone else in a box of that's who they're supposed to be, is a huge dishonoring of the fullness and the authenticity of that person. And to say that women should be soft and delicate and peaceful and placating. I mean, that is one form of femininity. That is a beautiful form of femininity. I'm not dishonoring that as an expression, but that is only one form. And the feminine can also be expressed with intensity. The feminine can also be expressed with fierceness, right? The feminine can also be expressed with calling a man or her man to the plate. The feminine can also be expressed in setting a boundary, right? Like there are so many ways that both the masculine and feminine can be expressed. And not only that, but women sometimes need to express their masculine. Men sometimes need to express their feminine. So to put any individual in a box of this is who they're supposed to be just because of their gender is a huge dishonoring of the individual. And I started out by saying that women have an incredible amount of power over men. And men who are unconscious, or men who are operating in an unconscious form of masculinity, are threatened by this power. And this is not news. I mean, I put up a post about this the other day and it got a lot of attention. And one of the women I remember commented on this and she's like, I just don't understand how we have power, right? Like and many of the women did understand. They were like, yes, I get this. This makes sense. But one person in particular, I remember the comment. She was like, I don't understand. I don't see this in real life. I don't understand how women have power over men. And this is an example of someone who is completely bought into this disempowering narrative. So, and I think, based on the country she was from, and I don't want to get into all the details about that, but I think there's probably a strong cultural influence there. There's probably, this is probably something that she has been raised in. This is a global thing. This is not a US thing, or this is a global thing, this disempowerment of the feminine. And she just couldn't see that, I don't understand how women have power over men. That just doesn't make any sense to me. But it's not that hard to see if you really look, because, I mean, it's in our media, it's in our movies, it's in our books, it's in our stories, it's everywhere. How many men have been seduced by a woman to their own demise? I mean, that's not a new idea. Throughout history, so many women have seduced men into a compromised position. That's power. Now, I'm not saying all the women out there should go seduce men, but I'm just saying, that's an example of feminine power. How many of our politicians have been seduced, right? This is not new information. This is something we've seen play out over and over and over and over and over again. How many men have gone to extreme lengths for a woman they love? It's a known fact, and I understand some women may not have experienced this from a man. So I understand if in your personal experience you say, I've never experienced this from a man before, I get that. But it's a known reality that you see all over the place, that when a man is truly in love with a woman, he will devote his entire life to her. I mean, it's actually quite common that men give up and sacrifice so much of what they could have as a single man out in the world to devote themselves to a woman and a family. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I mean, I've made that decision, right? I think something that comes with embracing feminine power is it actually brings out the best in a man. So I'm not saying that making those sacrifices is a bad thing, but it's a known thing that so many men, when they fall in love with a woman, will sacrifice so much to honor her and protect her and be with her. And that is an expression of feminine power, right? That is an expression of how much power women have over men. And I think the strong, pervasive element of men being emotionally unavailable, this kind of archetype of being a macho guy, and I don't reveal my heart, I'm not sensitive, I don't share my feelings, right? I mean, everybody knows what I'm talking about here. There's this archetype, it's worldwide. It's been the dominant masculine archetype throughout history the macho man, of the insensitive man, of the man who is not feeling centered, of the man who is not emotional, of he's 100% warrior, right? And there are gifts in the warrior. I'm not saying the warrior is a bad thing, but a balanced human can move between being the warrior and being something else as well. And this kind of emotionless, emotionally unavailable, macho archetype of a man is actually a defense against who he's afraid he might become if he were to feel something for a woman. Right? This macho masculine archetype is a way of protecting himself against the vulnerability that he would experience by falling in love. We as men who have been brought up in this macho, highly masculine world need to learn to embrace that in ourselves, because it actually brings out our wholeness. Women who have been also brought up in this macho masculine world and who have been taught to dishonor their intuition, who have been taught to divert their power towards men, women who have been taught to be small, to be little, to not use your voice, to make sure men are comfortable, to make sure men are happy, to make sure that you please men, to make sure that men are never disappointed in you. And it's actually, I mean, it's not just men, it's everybody, right? Your mother taught you, most likely in many instances, your mother taught you to not displease her, right? And it's an archetype of woman that has been perpetuated and enforced in our world, is that women are not supposed to be a certain way. Women are not supposed to be powerful. They're not supposed to be strong. They're not supposed to use their voice. They're not supposed to create boundaries. They're supposed to divert their power towards the men in their lives. They're supposed to stand behind their husband and all this kind of stuff that has been perpetuated throughout our world since, for thousands of years. I think this conversation, both for women and for men, the willingness to, as I said earlier, for women to own their power and to start practicing and getting comfortable expressing their power. And when women do that, especially if they're doing that in an environment where the wounded masculine is active, and I don't just mean in men, the wounded masculine can also be active in women, right? A lot of your mothers will tell you not to be powerful, right? I remember my wife told me once that her mother said to her that, you're either gonna bulldoze over a man, or you're going to completely submit to a man, like something to that effect. I might not be using the exact words right, but this was a message that her mother gave her, right? And the message that she was getting is like, there's something wrong with you being powerful, right? There's something not okay with how your relationships are going to be as a result of how powerful she experienced my wife being as a child. And my wife shared me, like, I don't want my relationship to be either of those things. Like, I don't want to bulldoze over my man. I also don't want to be, completely at the mercy of my man. I want to be an equal partner. And I know for myself, and maybe I wasn't always like this when I was younger and I was raised by a toxic masculine father and I grew up in a certain culture. But as I came into my own consciousness, that was something I wanted in a partner, right? I didn't want a woman who was going to blindly submit to everything I say. I wanted a woman with her own ideas, with her own confidence, with her own boundaries, with her willingness to communicate with me authentically and be powerful with me, right? Like I wanted a woman who had the ability to do that. That is one of the biggest differences between my wife and people I've dated in the past, was that very element. One of the biggest things that made my wife stand out to me and be like, I think you're the kind of person I could marry, was that exact element, was her ability to access her power. And my wife and I in our relationships, neither one of us completely submits to the other. There may be times, but the way our relationship operates is that we have an ongoing, intelligent dialogue of equality, an equal sharing of ideas, an equal respect of the other person as an equal partner in our lives. And I know that conscious men are seeking this in a partner. Unconscious men are not, right? Unconscious men are living in an old paradigm of masculinity that are very afraid and very threatened by that. When they experience a woman in her power, they take it personally. A lot of men out there, when they experience feminine power, they feel that it is a personal attack on men. They don't see that this is a human being with her own thoughts, her own feelings, her own ideas, her own assumptions, her own beliefs, her own things that she's proud of, things that she wants to accomplish, right? Things that she stands for. They don't see all of that. They see this is a woman. She's supposed to behave in a certain way. And when she's not behaving that way, I take it as a personal attack on my masculinity. And I think these unconscious dynamics that are present in so many relationships, and often the people in which they are present are not even aware of them. These things have never been brought to light. These things have never been openly discussed, right? These things have never been, I want to say, like, these men are not necessarily even bad men. And these ideas, these deeply held beliefs about women and about femininity are not even necessarily conscious, right? Like, I'm not saying these men are intentionally trying to perpetrate this on women. I'm saying this is something that has been so deeply woven into our cultures for so many thousands and thousands and thousands of years that it's an automatic response when a man who is operating from wounded masculinity is presented with an empowered woman. And she starts speaking her mind, and she starts creating boundaries, and she starts saying, no, I'm not okay with that. And she starts calling him to the plate, and she starts saying, listen, if you want to be with me, I'm going to need X, Y, or Z from you, right? Like, when he experiences that from a woman, he receives it as a personal attack on his masculinity. And it's not that he's trying to do that. It's that he is so deeply entrenched in this old way of thinking, in this old way of feeling, in these old belief systems, that he, without some kind of work on uncovering this and releasing this from himself, is largely incapable of seeing it any other way. And so many of the women who are out there dating right now, or who are in relationships or marriages with men that they don't feel honored and respected and appreciated by, are dealing with a man who has a lot of this going on, or dealing with men in the world who have a lot of this going on. And a lot of those same women, I'm not saying this is everybody, but I'm saying a lot of those same women are operating and continuing to perpetuate their own disempowered femininity, which is continuing to call in these same types of men. It is, the two are a vibrational equivalent. I hope you understand that. The two are a vibrational equivalent. A woman who is a woman who is operating in her disempowered feminine is the vibrational equivalent of a man who is operating in his wounded masculine. And so the two are going to attract each other. The two are going to be attracted to each other. And they're going to enter into a kind of toxic relationship dynamic that, as long as those vibrational states remain as such, they will likely perpetuate those toxic relational dynamics for a very long time. that relationship will probably go on for a very long amount of time. And they will probably continue to play out those roles, feeling misunderstood by each other, feeling violated by each other, feeling attacked by each other, feeling unheard, disrespected, and on and on and on. Now, something I want to say is that this is not women's fault and this is not men's fault. And so a lot of times, what you see is there's a large culture of women who talk about how men are the problem. Men are so emotionally unavailable. They're so dense. They're so harsh. They're so controlling. They're so, there's a large culture of women who talk about it like men are the problem. And there's a large culture of men who talk about it like women are the problem, right? Oh, women are manipulative. They're selfish. They're deceitful. They're whatever, right? And both sides have all these assumptions about the other side. It is not either's fault, because what we all need to really understand is that the modern person, me and you who are alive here in 2024, we didn't create this. We didn't start this. This is a generational trauma that has been going on way before any of us were here. Like, this is something that we were all born into, men and women and everybody else alike. This is something that we've all inherited. It's something that we've all been born into. So it's not that, men are perpetrating this on women, or women are toxic and manipulative, or like any of that. Like, none of those assumptions are true. This is a generational trauma that we have all inherited. We inherited it from our parents, who inherited it from their parents, who inherited it from their parents, this goes back thousands and thousands of years. Some of our ancient spiritual texts that some of our religions are based around are perpetuating these types of dynamics in them, right? Like, that's how old this is. That's how long this has been going on. I see a comment that says, we didn't start the fire, but we in it. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. We didn't start the fire, but we're in it. And so there's a personal responsibility on each of us to become more conscious. And if you believe in the power of energetics, if you believe in the laws of vibration, I know this is some newer technology. Or maybe not most people, but a lot of people aren't necessarily into all of this or understand the meaning behind all of it. But if you're into energetics, if you're into vibrational technology, if you're into really how all of this works, is life is showing up as a reflection of ourselves, right? We are attracting and creating the experiences that are a reflection of where we're operating from. And so while we've all been born into a world that historically for thousands and thousands of years has existed in a very, very low vibrational state. And again, if you're going to argue that, I'm not saying anybody is arguing that, but if you do want to argue that, just take a look around. How long have we been warring for? How long have we used murder and destruction as the method to solve problems? Which actually, on that note, I'll just say that is a toxic masculine approach, right? Oh, they don't agree with me? Let me just kill them. Let me just burn them down, right? Whereas the feminine is a more compassionate, a more empathetic, a more collaborative perspective on things. So the feminine is more about, hey, let's collaborate. There's a misunderstanding. Let's sit down. Let's talk about it. I'm sure there's a way we can all win here, right? So that's just a symptom of the unconscious masculinity that has ruled our world for eons. And we've all been born into that. The very vibrational reality that we've been born into is one that has sought to suppress feminine power and uphold the toxic masculinity. And when I say toxic masculinity, I'm not saying that masculinity is toxic. There are many, many examples of healthy masculinity where we show up as providers, we show up as protectors, where we honor and uphold the feminine, where we use our strength and our courage and that warrior archetype to support and to uphold and to enforce goodness, right? So there's definitely an expression of healthy masculinity. But if you look at the history of planet Earth, healthy masculinity is not what has ruled the world. And the vibrational reflection of toxic masculinity is toxic femininity, where toxic masculinity is the gross misuse of power, right? Murder, destruction, domination, control, a lack of empathy, a lack of compassion, an unwillingness to see the other side of things, an unwillingness to open our hearts and intelligently engage with uncomfortable topics, an unwillingness to live in the gray area, right, where things are not black and white, right? The toxic masculine is very much about being right, very much about it's black and it's white, and if it's the way I see it, it's right. If it's not the way I see it, it's wrong. Toxic femininity is the vibrational equivalent of that. Toxic femininity is victimhood, martyrdom, complaining. What are some others? Manipulation, right? Like guilt tripping, right? These are examples of toxic femininity. Now, I'm not saying only women use toxic femininity. I'm not saying only men use toxic masculinity. These are certain archetypes. These are certain forces that we all can embody. But largely, men who operate in the toxic masculine, men who operate in the control, domination, misuse of power, are going to attract women who operate in toxic femininity, which is the victimhood, the martyrdom, the complaining, the guilt tripping, the manipulation. Right? My wife and I have often used an example of this woman that we saw in the Orange Theory line. And I don't know who this woman is. I never saw her again. It was a one-time thing. But we just remember this woman standing in the Orange Theory line. We were waiting in line to go into Orange Theory, and she was standing right in front of us, and she was talking to her friend, and she was just going on and on, like just talking trash about her husband. Just, I don't even remember what she said, but she was just complaining and victimizing and just talking trash about her husband. And I'm not even criticizing this woman. I understand where she is. She's living in the toxic feminine. And she probably is married to a man who is a strong expression of the toxic masculine. Right? So these two are an equal reflection of each other. But it is so sad. It's so sad that this is the reality that so many people are living in. Like you think like this is your partner. This is the person you choose to marry. This is the person you spend every day of your life with. This is the person you wake up to and you go to sleep to. Right? This is the person that hopefully you would be able to share your heart and your dreams with. This is the person that hopefully they would support and uphold you no matter what. And when we see like what is possible in a conscious relationship, and then we contrast that with what I saw expressed in the Orange Theory line that day, it is just so sad that what these two people could have by becoming more conscious and healing themselves is reduced to what we saw that day. And they're not the only ones. And I'm not nitpicking that woman. I'm talking about a cultural thing that is happening for millions and millions of people. And so if I were to use that example, actually, or an example like that, where you have this partnership where the woman is living in the toxic feminine, the man is living in the toxic masculine. She's disempowered in her marriage. She doesn't feel heard. She doesn't feel validated. She doesn't feel seen. She doesn't feel appreciated. She doesn't feel worthy. She doesn't feel considered, right? Which is a reflection of the toxic masculine, which does not do those things, right? It doesn't hear, it doesn't consider, it doesn't empathize, it doesn't validate, it doesn't support, it doesn't uphold, it doesn't provide, it doesn't protect, right? It's more of a control, domination, black and white, my way. Anything that's uncomfortable for me, I don't want to deal with. Shut your mouth, woman, right? That kind of thing. So this is a woman who's living because that's the environment that she lives in. That's the environment that her marriage is. She has been forced, or maybe it might have started before her marriage. I'm not saying her marriage forced her into it, but she is expressing the toxic feminine. She's a victim to the situation. She complains about it. She probably has all kinds of guilt-trippy, manipulative tactics in her marriage that enable her to get what she wants from it, or at least what she thinks she wants from it. Right? So the one creates the other. The one perpetuates the other. The more he lives in the toxic masculine, the more he perpetuates her in the toxic feminine. The more she expresses the toxic feminine, the more she reinforces his toxic masculine. And this is a dynamic that is being played out in millions and millions of marriages all around the world. This is a dynamic that is being played out in the dating world, right? Where a lot of women are showing up in very defensive, reactive types of places around men. And they're attracting men who are reflecting that to them in their lack of emotional availability, in their lack of commitment readiness. And there's a building resentment on both sides. And the more women experience men like this, the more they hate men. The more men experience women like this, the more they hate women. These are dynamics that are being played out all across all the cultures of the world. Now, if we were to take that woman, the example from the Orange Theory line, and again, I'm not talking about her, I'm talking about her and millions of other people. And maybe she's different now. This was a long time ago. But if we're to take that as an example, if she were to choose to start embodying her feminine power, if she were to choose to start expressing her feminine power in her marriage, that would call her man into a greater possibility. Now, if he's not able to receive that possibility, that would eventually move that man out of her life. But she would create an environment where that relationship could no longer be sustained as it is, as it has been. She would create an environment where that man would have to change, or that man would have to remove himself from her life. Now, of course, it goes both ways. If he were to suddenly embody the healthy, the conscious masculine, he would call forth more from his woman. He would say, I want to hear your voice more. I want to know what's really going on for you. I want to know what's in your heart. I want to know, I want you to create boundaries. I want you to tell me when something isn't okay with you. He would start saying, I'm not okay with this manipulative stuff you pull. I'm not okay with this guilt-trippy attitude you give me. Right? I don't like the way that you talk to your friends about me. He would start calling these things out. He would call her into a greater possibility. And if she would either need to change, or she would eventually be removed from his life. This is the way. This is how we are able to create the life and the love that we want to have. It is by embodying our greatest essence. And there is a huge resistance to both the healthy feminine and the healthy masculine. Men who embody the healthy masculine are called simps. They're put down by other men. a lot of women call these men weak. You know, I've often said that if you are living as a woman in a mentality where you think all men are jerks, and then you meet a healthy, conscious man, you are going to view him as less of a man. He's not going to be enough of a man to you. Because that mentality that says all men are jerks is actually the toxic feminine. And the toxic feminine needs to equate men with the toxic masculine. There truly are kind, sensitive men all over the world. There truly are. I mean, I meet them all the time. But the fact is, a lot of the women, especially the women who are tied to a belief system that says all men are jerks, all men are assholes, all men are liars and cheaters and everything else. The women who are tied to that belief system do not have the heart to receive a kind, sensitive man. So they see those men, but they say, oh, well, I'm not attracted to men like that. And then the men that they are attracted to are toxic. And then they resent men as a result of it. And I'm not just throwing this on women here. Men do the same thing. Men do the exact same thing. But this is something that is so pervasive. This is the dominating consciousness in our culture. And when I say our culture, I don't just mean the US, I mean the world culture. There's a strong need in our world right now for both men and women to embrace feminine power. This is truly the next level in our collective healing. And women, understandably so, are terrified to do this. Because feminine power is not received well when it is expressed in our world. And women have an incredible amount of power. I mean, do you know that women make up about 70% of the buying power, at least in the United States alone? Like that's insane. Like most businesses in the United States and probably around the world too, rely mostly on women to sustain themselves. Like that is an incredible amount of power. Any high corporate official will tell you, and I've heard this from so many corporate officials on different podcasts and different things I've listened to, they will tell you that the women in positions of leadership outwork the men in positions of leadership by like 10 times over. Like they just run circles around them. And if you see the kind of sexism and the kind of shaming and attack that goes on when you see women rising into positions of power, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in politics, if you see what happens to women when they face putting themselves in position of power, it's understandably terrifying. It is so much easier and so much safer to shrink down and be small. And the truth is, and I firmly believe this, I think a lot of men are afraid to see women in positions of power because they're afraid to see women outdo them. And this isn't a bash against men. I think men are incredible. And I think, conscious men can do just as amazing as conscious women can. I'm not saying that women are better in any way. We're equals. But this cultural resistance to inviting women into positions of power, this cultural resistance to seeing women be empowered and expressive and strong, is coming from a male wound. It's coming from a male insecurity. It's coming from a masculine fear of inadequacy. You know, there's a very pervasive idea that I was talking about this a little bit earlier, but that women should be soft and sensitive and appease her man. And that's just not true. That women should not be that way. I mean, it's okay for women to be that way at times when it's appropriate, but that is not who women should be as a whole. And men who perpetuate that idea are men who are threatened by experiencing his woman's power. And what we're seeing now, and I mean, this has been going on for a long time. The women's rights movement started decades ago. And we've seen how much resistance there's been since the women's rights movement started. I mean, it's been an uphill battle the whole way. And that's not for no reason. I mean, we are undoing generations and thousands of years of feminine power being repressed. But the thing is that when women embrace this power, they will become the catalyst for completely changing our world. And I've had lots of women go through my programs, and my programs are largely about creating conscious love. You know, I mean, we talk about all kinds of things in there, but largely they're about creating conscious love. And what I really teach more than anything else to the women in the programs, and we just recently opened my program to men, and it's wonderful to have men joining in on this conversation. I'm really grateful that there are men who want to do that. And I think it's really healing for us to come together and join in this conversation together. I think it's beautiful. But what I've largely taught to the women who have gone through my programs over the years is how to embody their feminine power in relationships with men. Whereas throughout their whole life, they've been terrified to do so. And they've been shamed and criticized for doing so. And they've been put down and they've been held down from doing so. And as a result of that, they have formed relationships with men who perpetuate those stereotypes, who perpetuate that context. And it's not an accident that so many of the women who go through my program end up in a really healthy relationship within a relatively short amount of time. That's not an accident. Because when they start owning this power, they start calling in men who are receptive to this power. When they start healing the things within themselves that were attracted to a toxic ideal of masculinity, they start to see different kinds of men become attractive to them that before they were never attracted to. I mean, it's not an accident that this happens. That is a frequency. It's a frequency that women have been raised in, that women have been taught to embody, that women have been punished for not or for stepping outside of. And when women take that on and they live in that and they continue to be in that, their life becomes a reflection of that. It's not an accident that when women step into their power and start embodying this power, that they create something different in their life. It's not an accident at all. It's perfectly congruent. It's a vibrational law. It's a vibrational truth. And when men can soften, when men can open their hearts and heal the wounds that cause them to be so threatened by feminine power, when men can encourage a woman to step into her power, when men can encourage that full, authentic expression from a woman, when they can not only encourage it, but they can enforce it, they can protect it. That brings forth a whole other strength from men. You see, historically, we have thought of a strong man as this kind of macho masculine archetype that I was talking about earlier. Historically, we thought as a strong man as the warrior archetype. And again, I've said this, the warrior is not a bad thing, but out of balance, the warrior is a toxic thing. When the warrior is not balanced with other archetypes. And throughout history, throughout our world, we have seen and thought of strong men as the warriors. This one-sided version of masculinity, this shallow perception of what masculinity is and what it's supposed to be and what it's supposed to look like, as I've said, it is a resistance to, as men, our own vulnerability, our own fragility. Whereas if I open my heart and I let myself fall in love with a woman, I let myself be committed and devoted to a woman, I let myself receive the fullness, the full authentic expression of her. Even when she has something to say that I'm not comfortable with. Even when she's holding up a mirror in front of me and I don't necessarily like what I see in it. That is incredibly healing for men. You see, one of the things that men are so afraid of in relationship with a woman, that when a man becomes devoted to a woman, when a man makes that commitment and like spends his life in service of his partnership, that relationship becomes a mirror that he has to look into every single day. She is always reflecting back to him his own fears, his own insecurities, his own doubts, the places inside himself where he feels like he's falling short. Right? Like when a man devotes himself to a woman, she is a constant mirror for him. She is constantly reflecting back to him everything he's afraid of within himself. And for men, it's so much easier to be like, stay small, woman. Don't rock the boat. Right? I don't want to have to look in that mirror. I don't want to have to see the things that you're reflecting in me. And by him not confronting his own fear, his own insecurity, his own weakness, that keeps him small. This is what so many men don't understand, is that inviting and enforcing and encouraging feminine power brings out the best in men as well. That relationship then becomes a mirror through which he can sharpen his tool. Right? By looking in that mirror every day. By seeing himself reflected in that mirror. And by appreciating her as the gift that is always reflecting himself back to him, he becomes better. Now, the toxic feminine, this is something I didn't say about the toxic feminine earlier. The toxic feminine is highly critical, right? These are the women who are always criticizing their partners. These are the women who are always tearing down their partners. You're not enough of this. You're not enough of that. Why do you do that? Why? Like, They emasculate their partners. Rather than upholding his masculinity, they tear it down. The empowered feminine is not critical. She doesn't tear down her man. She doesn't tear down men as a whole. She's not the one sitting around going, oh, all men are jerks, all men are assholes. That's not the empowered feminine that does that. Sometimes, like when we think of feminists, sometimes they can go to that extreme. That's a very extreme version of feminism. But real feminists, who can easily be men or women, are the ones who uphold the equality of all people. You know, I think about what Martin Luther King said in his movement is he said, you know, I'm not for my people, I'm for all people. And of all people, my people need some help. Right? So yes, I'm uplifting my people to be equal with all people. And this is a very similar conversation here. Like, feminine power isn't trying to tear down the masculine. It's actually wanting to uphold the highest aspects of the masculine while also being held as equal. And so she's not critical. She's not tearing down her man. She's not tearing down men. But she is calling out inauthenticity when she sees it. When a boundary is crossed, when she's in relationship with a man and she is somehow mistreated in some way, or a boundary is crossed, or she is dishonored, she calls that out. She says, this is not okay with me. You know, the empowered feminine, actually, one thing that's really amazing about it is she can have a powerful conversation with a man. Let's take like a dating scenario. Let's say she was getting to know a man and maybe they know each other in a relatively early stage of their relationship. And say he says or does something that offends her or crosses a boundary or is not okay with her. The wounded feminine would go, oh, he's a jerk, he's an asshole, and just cut him out of her life. But the empowered feminine would actually make herself vulnerable and say, hey, what happened wasn't okay with me. What you said, what you did was not okay with me. If our relationship moves forward, I'm not going to be okay with this kind of behavior. Rather than taking it as a personal attack on her, she's able to see it as something that maybe he was unaware of. She's able to give him enough grace that maybe it was a mistake. She's able to give him the opportunity to make up for it. And I want to tell you, I cannot count how many times I have seen men transform as a result of a conversation like this with a woman, where she's not coming to him from a critical place, where she's not tearing him down, where she's not insulting him. She's actually upholding the highest good in him while at the same time naming an inauthenticity, or at the same time naming something that is not okay with her. And men will often completely transform around a conversation like this with a woman. And there are men who will not. Right? There are men who are going to resist that kind of power, as I've spoken about. There are men who are going to want women to stay small. As a woman, accessing this power and embracing this power is the only way to call forth the man that you really want to have in your life. A man who will love you and cherish you and respect you and honor you and protect you and treat you right. Asserting your power is the only way to call forward that man. And for men, opening your heart to this power in women, wanting to enforce and uphold this power in women, is the only way that he can call in a woman who is going to uphold his highest good, who is going to love and respect and cherish and honor him. And as a collective, as a society, as we learn to receive this power and invite this power in, for women, it's about courage. It's about the willingness to face the backlash that happens when you do assert your power. And believe me, it's out there. Like, you know, when women start asserting their power, I said this earlier, in business and politics and like wherever it is, they get attacked for doing so. And for women, it's about the courage to stand in the face of that and continue asserting that power. For men, it's about the willingness to face the vulnerability and the insecurity that is going to be brought up when you open yourself to a woman's power. And that doesn't weaken a man, that strengthens him. You know, so many of us think that avoiding the things that we're afraid of is strength. It's not. That is the definition of weakness. Oh, that makes me insecure. I don't want to talk about it. Oh, that makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about it. Let me block out anything that's not in perfect agreement with me. Right? Like that's the definition of weakness. You know, in the Inspired Love program, which is my program for healing and creating conscious love, what the process actually is facing up to all of the things that we fear. Every expression of shame, every expression of guilt, every feeling of inadequacy, all the places in our lives that make us uncomfortable. All of the things that I've avoided, right? It's like the way we strengthen ourselves is by facing those things. And so for men, there is a big light that feminine power is going to shine on the places in which we are still insecure, on the places in which we are still afraid. And us being receptive to that light being shined. Us being receptive to having those things illuminating. And rather than resisting it or avoiding it or criticizing it or trying to tear it down or trying to disempower the feminine, to really do some introspection with ourselves around what that is revealing to us. That's going to bring out the best in men. And so what I want to get at here, and I mean, I've been getting at it the whole time, but you know, to kind of summarize what I'm saying here is that embracing feminine power, women having the courage to do so, even in the face of resistance, men being able to soften and open themselves and receive that and encourage and uphold that, is going to be something that transforms our world. And for us as individuals, it's going to be something that brings about a deep healing in us as individuals and ultimately in our relationships. This is the only way to create conscious love. for women and men. This is the only way to create conscious love. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to open up for any questions. I'll give a moment if anybody has questions they want to drop in the chat. Okay, so this question is from Yuri, and she says, can you describe some characteristics of the masculine and feminine energy, please? And she's asking, what defines masculine energy? Is it true that its purpose is to protect and provide? Yes. So feminine energy is the softness, the warmth, the understanding, the compassion, the willingness to deal with gray area, right? The willingness to not have everything be so clearly defined. Like the masculine is very about structure and boundaries and clearly defining things. The feminine energy is willing to wrestle with difficult issues. It's willing to see different sides of a conversation. It's willing to soften. It's willing to allow for more, right? For more different sides. It's willing to be compassionate. It's willing to be sensitive. It's willing to be empathetic. These are all expressions of feminine energy, right? The softness, the warmth, the gentleness, the compassion, the empathy, the intuitiveness, right? Like intuition, I think, is largely a feminine quality. And men have intuition. It's not that men can't access intuition, but I think it is a more feminine quality. And men, to be intuitive, need to be more in touch with their feminine aspects, whereas the masculine is very much about the mind, right? Where the mind is structured, the mind is rigid, the mind creates boundaries, the mind wants to control things. These are aspects of the masculine. Now, it's important to say as I'm talking about this, that the masculine is not a bad thing. Like the mind and the way I'm talking about it is not a bad thing. The feminine is not necessarily a good thing. These are both forces that are parts of nature, right? And it is how we as conscious beings embody and utilize these forces. We all, both men and women, have masculine and feminine energy. And so it is about how we as individuals, as conscious individuals, choose to access and utilize these energies within ourselves. As I said, there is a toxic expression of masculine, there's a toxic expression of feminine. You asked, is the masculine really about protecting and providing? Yes, those are some of the healthiest expressions of masculinity. The ability to protect, the ability to provide. Strength is masculine. Courage is masculine. Discipline is masculine. I've mentioned today, like several times, the archetype of the warrior. The archetype of the warrior is the willingness to courageously fight the battle, right? The archetype of the warrior is the willingness to face fear, is the willingness to charge into those scary places, right? So that is a masculine quality. These things are, as I've said, neither one of them is inherently good or bad, but a healthy, conscious individual has a good blend of both, right? So as a man who is strong and courageous and committed, who is disciplined, who is honorable, who is a protector, who is a provider, right? He is going to experience the fullness of his masculinity by also having a degree of empathy, by also having a degree of compassion, by also having a degree of sensitivity, a degree of emotional availability, a degree of intuitiveness, a degree of being in touch with his own emotional reality, right? Men who disconnect from this become the toxic masculine, which is the force that, as I've said today, is pervasive in our world, right? It's this very logical, controlling, dominating, forceful expression of masculinity that is not sensitive, that is not empathetic. So those are expressions of masculinity and femininity. And yes, I do think, some of the healthiest ways that masculinity is expressed is as protecting and providing, right? Like being that strong, secure place that the feminine can rely on. The feminine is about flow, right? The feminine is like planning is not a feminine quality. Structure is not a feminine quality. That doesn't mean women can't plan or be structured. I mean, any woman who's a mother or, has worked an important job, like, I mean, you can plan, you can structure. It's not that women can't do that, right? But the feminine is fully expressed when she is not in her mind, when she is in her heart, when she is not planning, when she is not controlling, when she is not trying to figure things out, when she is in the moment, when she is flowing, when she is operating on intuition. A healthy expression of femininity is to have access to her intuition, her empathetic nature, her emotional reality, her sensitivity, her compassion, while also having strength, having courage, having power, having the ability to face challenges and difficult things, right? Like that is the healthiest expression of femininity. And as I've mentioned many times today, conscious individuals are individuals who seek to embody the fullness of themselves, which means embodying both of these qualities. And you have men who are dominantly masculine, but are still in touch with their feminine aspects. You have women who are dominantly feminine, but are still in touch with their masculine aspects. You also have the opposite. You have men who are very feminine, but have, access to their masculine. And you have women who are very masculine, but have access to their feminine. And, there are a lot of people out there saying that it should be one way or the other way. It shouldn't be. It should be what's authentic for you. In a traditional kind of relationship, in a traditional man, woman, hetero, binary type of relationship, when it's conscious, you would largely have the man be the dominant masculine force, largely have the woman be the dominant feminine force. But that is by no means the way it should always be. So I think, we as individuals need to have the courage to express ourselves authentically, express ourselves in a way that is true and authentic to who we are, and invite in the relationship, the partnership, and the life that is a reflection of our authenticity, versus trying to force ourselves to be something that we think society is going to accept, or that we think other people are going to accept, or that we think, will get us liked or get us validated or get us attention or whatever, right? Like, that's when we create the life that is not right for us. It's by really giving ourselves permission to be our full authentic self and letting the chips fall as they may, so to speak, that we invite in the life that is truly meant for us, right? Like I spoke about energetic and vibrational law earlier. And if you think about it like this, it's like you as an individual have a core vibrational signature that is the truest expression of who you are. And that's something that was maybe like written on your soul, so to speak, right? As the unique expression of life that you are. And what we have is we have all kinds of fear. We're not born with fear. Fear is something that is trained into us throughout our lives. And so when you come into this world with this authentic core vibrational signature that is the truest expression of who you are, and then based on your upbringing, based on the things that you learn from your parents, based on the things that you learn from your teachers, based on the different things that you experience throughout your life and the wounds that you acquire and all these different things, there is a tendency to compromise that authenticity. And I mean, honestly, most of us, and I can even include myself in this, we don't really know what that authentic signature would really look like if it was fully expressed, right? Like the fear through our upbringing has to such a huge degree clouded that authentic vibrational signature that is the truth of who we are. And so our life journey is really a journey when you're on the conscious path, when you're healing and growing spiritually. Our life journey is a journey of releasing all the fear that we have in our consciousness that makes us feel that it's not safe to be our truest selves. And as we become more and more courageous and more willing to express ourselves authentically, the truth of who we really are becomes more and more available to us. And then to a certain degree, you attract a relationship that's actually resonant for you. At the right time, once you have healed this to a certain degree, you attract a relationship that's resonant for you because enough of your authenticity is being expressed that you're able to attract in a partner who is the equal reflection of that. When your authenticity is being hidden, vibrational law says that you cannot attract a life, or you cannot create a life that is going to reflect your authenticity. You are going to create and attract a life that is a reflection of your inauthenticity. And this is why so many of us are living in relationships that don't make us happy, living a life that doesn't make us happy, and careers that don't make us happy, right? Because we're not able to fully express the truth of who we are. And our life path is a journey of uncovering that and releasing the fear to step into our fullness of who we are and who we can be. So, thank you for the question. I know I took that to a little bit of another level and went on a little bit of a tangent, but thank you for the question, and always great to see you, Yuri. Thank you for being on. Okay, I think that's going to be my last question today. I'm going to take this from CLB 0210. How to ever let your guard down to allow yourself to be intimate with someone after once was seen as an amazing man, cheated on you, and destroyed your sense of safety. First thing I want to say is just thank you for sharing, and thank you for being here. And I see your heart, and I see your vulnerability, and I understand how much you must have been hurt by that experience. And I went through something similar. I'll just quickly share this. I've spoken about this on the podcast many times, but my first love, right? I was so naive and so young and so innocent in a lot of ways. And my first love cheated on me and then blindsided me and then threw it in my face and mocked me afterwards. And I mean, it was a deeply traumatic experience. And following that, I went into years of drug use and destructive behavior and, all kinds of stuff. And so I just say that to say that I know what that's like, to have your faith completely shaken, your faith in people, your faith in love, your faith in men or women. I know what that's like. And I just want to say lots of love to you as you navigate this. And, the power that we have as individuals comes through our willingness to confront our fear. I was talking about this earlier. Today, the topic of today's discussion was awakening feminine power, right? And I was sharing earlier how, there are a lot of men in our world that are afraid of feminine power, and that when men embrace that fear and open themselves to that feminine power and to the mirror that feminine power is holding up, that strengthens them as men, right? When men no longer need to avoid and suppress that power, but they actually have the ability to open themselves to it and be healed by it, they become better men. They become stronger men. And so there's a very similar theme here with your question, right? Is that your question about how do I feel safe again after I've been hurt? Well, it's not that you're never going to be hurt again. It's not that nobody is ever going to let you down, or you're never going to be disappointed, or your faith is never going to be shaken again. And maybe it will happen in a relationship. Maybe it won't happen in a relationship. Maybe it'll happen in some other way, right? I'll share, for example, when my life was diagnosed with cancer, my wife and I were on Instagram the other day, yesterday actually, and we were just sharing a little bit about the journey we went through with her cancer treatment. And she didn't betray me. She didn't cheat on me, but that experience shook me to the very core, shook her to the very core, right? So life has a way of shaking us sometimes. And our strength as individuals doesn't come from never being shaken. It comes from who we become as we're being shaken. I'll just share, yesterday I put up a post sharing political support for a certain individual, and I'm not going to go into who it was or any of the details about it right now. But I got pretty viscerally attacked by hundreds of people. That shook me, right? Like me speaking my truth about something, it's vulnerable to a degree to put it out there and say, like, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, right? I was exposing myself to my community. I was being vulnerable in sharing something personal, something that's true for me. And I was met with being viscerally attacked by like hundreds of people. And so that's an example of like something that shakes me, right? And I was shook. I mean, if you read my stories, like I was shook. But it's not about never being shook, right? I'm not going to be like, oh, okay, so I shared a truth about me and I got attacked for it, and so now I'm never going to share my truth again. No, it's like, okay, like this shakes me. And that being shaken gives me an opportunity to strengthen myself in the face of challenge. And so to the person who's asking the question, this experience shook you, right? Somebody you trusted, somebody you thought was an amazing man, someone you put faith in, they betrayed you. And that shakes your faith in men, that shakes your faith in love, that shakes your faith in yourself. I get that. I know what that's like. I've been through that many times in my life. But what I want to illuminate for you is that you have two options right now. You can close your heart around this experience and you can become bitter. And some people do this, right? You could be, men are jerks. You can't trust them. They're cheaters. They're liars. They're manipulative. I trusted a man once. Looked what happened to me, right? Like that's one way to deal with this. You close your heart around it. You become bitter. You become resentful and you shut down. The other way to deal with this, and this is what I couldn't do when I was 16 years old, when I threw myself into drugs, like the other thing you can do with this is you can allow it to break your heart open. And you can surrender to the incredible vulnerability that is the reality of the life we're living. And I don't say this to be morbid, but I just say this to like really presence, like the incredible vulnerability that we live in as humans, that we try so hard to not acknowledge. And what do I want to say here? Maybe the next time you fall in love, and I'm not wishing this, I'm not intending this in any way, but maybe the next time you fall in love, the person doesn't cheat on you. Maybe they pass away. And again, I'm not wishing that. I'm not hoping that. I pray that you find love and happiness and that it lasts a long time. But see, most of us don't even think about this as like, when you find, let's say you find your person and you spend your whole life with them. At some point, one of you is going to pass. Like, even if you find the love of your life and you spend your whole life together, at some point, one of you is going to pass. And if you're not the one who passes first, that's a reality that you're going to have to confront someday. And it might even be harder after spending 50 years together than it is after spending 10. I'm watching my grandpa go through this right now with his wife. My grandma died when I was 11 years old, so he lost his first wife. His second wife has Alzheimer's, and she doesn't even know that he's her husband anymore. And so, like, I've watched my grandpa lose 2 wives now. And I say this, again, not to be morbid, but to presence, like, this is the incredible vulnerability that we deal with as human beings. We can lose people. They can break our heart. They can cheat on us. We can fall for a trap and realize we made a huge mistake. Like, these things can happen to us. And the only 2 choices we have in response to that is to close our hearts and become bitter, or to let these experiences break our heart open and deepen our capacity for love overall. And I'll just say, for me personally, I'm someone who has chosen the second path. I'm someone who has chosen to allow my heart to be broken open by the pain I've experienced in my life. And that has given me a greater capacity in relationship. It's given me a greater capacity in my ability to serve people. It's made me a better human being. It's made me more loving. So I don't know if that offers you any comfort or any clarity right now. But what I want to say is grief is a powerful teacher. And if rather than trying to resist the grief that you're going through, you can allow yourself to surrender into it and you can allow yourself to be healed by it, you will come out the other side of this with a new understanding of who you are as an individual, with a new strength and a new resilience about yourself. You'll go into your next relationship not expecting that you're just going to fall in love with someone and they're never going to hurt you, but understanding that this relationship may hurt you. And that while this relationship may hurt you, it may still be worth having. And that's a very courageous way to live. It's a very courageous way to live. It's a way that most people are just terrified to really open themselves to that. I just want to say in closing, thank you all so much for being here. To those of you who are live with me today, thank you for joining me live. To those of you who are listening in on the podcast, hello to you and thank you for tuning in to the podcast. So much love to all of you. I really appreciate you being here, appreciate your presence. I'll be back here next Tuesday, and much love, many blessings. Thank you to all of you. Have a great rest of your day. Bye. Thanks again for checking out the show. Please subscribe on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on the most. And I would love it so much if you'd leave a review and tell people what you think of us. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram @TheLivingRelationship to connect more closely. And I'm grateful to be supporting you on your journey to love.